So Venus is needs, Mars is desires. And there's always an interaction between needs and desires. Determine we need something, create a desire for it, achieve the need. You know, needs and desires are always evolving. And they're evolving from these values. So Venus, well, the inner side of Venus will relate a lot to what it is that we value. For many of us, because of our cultural conditionings, especially in modern times, we have been led to believe that when it comes to relationships, many of us bypass that inner relationship with ourselves. And we jump right into perceiving relationships as something that exists outside of ourselves. We go to the outer relating, which is known through Libra and the 7th house, Venus's dual rulership of Libra. And what we really need to learn how to recognize is we must have an inner relationship before we have a successful outer one. Most of you can understand those words. They're simple. But we don't always put that amount of energy into it, even when we show up at, an astrology workshop like this. So what we are many times looking at is the essential needs that are determined through Venus. And we even have a formula for essential needs. And I'd like to briefly go over that today. We'll save that for after lunch when we've been refreshed. But as we go through these needs and this inner relating within ourselves, most of us outpicture that. Most of us project that outward onto our partners. And we look for those needs to be met outside of ourselves instead of inward. And so what happens is that our relationships outside of ourselves tend to be that mirroring back to us of what we need to accomplish within ourselves, what we need to be self-sufficient in within ourselves before we go looking at it for someone else. The most common way you can know that is the person who always keeps tracking in the similar dynamics in a partner. Different face, different name, but same pattern. That's how we start to know that we're always outpicturing our essential needs. We're outpicturing the relationship we need to have with ourselves, Taurus, onto someone else, Libra. Okay? So does this make sense? Understanding this? This is simple stuff to understand. So Venus, the archetype of Venus, will exist from this whole spectrum of survival. And when we include that area of the archetype that includes survival, it's not only food, clothing, and shelter. It will also be the survival of the species. And what is necessary for the survival of the species? That biological act we call sex. So Venus will also then describe, along with this essential needs formula, but you can start with Venus. Venus will, in many ways, describe the essence of your deepest needs sexually. Okay? And Venus, when it is fully self-sufficient, will also describe self-sex, the big M word, masturbation. And so fully sufficient Venus also means sexually self-sufficient, essential need. Again, remember, the last separating desire to be exhausted is the sexual desire. So all of that starts to get involved in the dynamics of starting to look at relationships. It's not just Mars, how each of us are going to initiate going after getting that need met, but we can take the whole concept of sexuality and the physical part of sex, and we can break it down and take it back to Venus. Venus will describe how we want sex, the details of how we want sexuality. Again, we can start to describe that through our essential needs formula. Then along that spectrum, within that, okay, is Venus describing the whole spectrum of what we determine we need, what we want in our life. And it can be anything and everything. And so when you start to then look at Venus in a sign and a house, can you see how that will start to color that picture? It will fill in the details of the picture that we're trying to describe with ourselves. Okay? We have someone who has Venus in Taurus, for example, and they can have more interest in self-sex. They can have more interest in some of the sensuality that comes into sexuality. Whereas let's put Venus in Sagittarius, which is a fire sign, quick and fast. Whereas Venus in Taurus, nice and slow and sensual. You see how that starts to describe some of that sexuality. Now let's take this Venus archetype with these same two examples and go, you know, Venus and Taurus, please give me all my comforts. I would like to have nice pillows on the couch. I need to have a soft fabric with Venus and Taurus just to sit on, just to feel comfortable. You go over here and you put Venus and Sag again, and man, get the windows open. I want to live outdoors. You know, so you start to see how signs color this whole archetype of what we call Venus and our essential needs. Okay? Venus and the Libra side is going to be the whole thing of relationships. Again, we'll go there. But I want to just get this archetype of Venus down. Okay? This archetype of the inner side of Venus as much as anything else with that. So Venus is how we are determining on a very personal, intimate, inward level what we value and what we perceive we need. All right? What we perceive we need in our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others, our relationship with the world. When we take the archetype of Venus and it's retrograde, Venus is the rarest retrograde of the planetary retrogrades. It's only retrograde approximately 10% of the time. Venus moving through the wheel of the zodiac takes anywhere from 9 to 14 months. When we have a Venus is retrograde approximately 6 weeks every year and a half. So about every other year we have a Venus retrograde is what it feels like. When we don't have a Venus retrograde, it only takes 9 months to circle around that zodiac. When we have a Venus retrograde, it takes 14 months. And when we have a Venus retrograde, and I got to pull this one out of the head. When we have a Venus retrograde, I think Venus can spend as much as 5 months in one sign of the zodiac, making the 3 passages, direct, retrograde, and direct again. Anytime I'm speaking over your head, raise your hand, ask a question. Okay? All right? And if I'm speaking too simple, sorry. Trying to accommodate beginning to intermediate. and so this Venus retrograde that only happens about 10% of the time. How many people in this room were born with Venus retrograde? 1. See what I mean? How many people were born? How many people in this room have Mars retrograde natally? 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see just the difference with that right there in doing that. Now Venus, because it's moving fairly fast through the zodiac, it's closer to the sun, its revolution around the sun is faster. Venus is a fast-moving planet, so that evolution of our essential needs can happen pretty fast because Venus is always clicking through a sign of the zodiac. When Venus slows down and turns retrograde, it is a time period for us to really get clarity on what our values and needs are. Venus retrograde means, let's describe it the two different ways. The archetype is the same, but you'll understand it if I describe it the two different ways. Those souls who were born with Venus retrograde natally, and this will also be true if progressed Venus goes retrograde. Okay, Venus goes retrograde by progression, which it will do from time to time in your throughout our lives for some of us. When Venus is retrograde natally, this is a soul who is retrogrades from our geocentric, earth-centered viewpoint, in and of themselves mean to rebel. Retrogrades mean evolution. Okay? All the R words get related to retrogrades. The rebel, to review, to reevaluate. Another very common one is redoing, reliving. And all souls will have planetary retrogrades through their various incarnations. And when a soul comes through with a planetary retrograde, it can easily mean that that planetary archetype has had some level of resistance in evolving from past lives. And when it shows up in the current life as a natal retrograde, that resistance has reached a maximum point of resisting, and now we have got to move forward. However, before we can move forward, what do we have to do? We have to bring it up and relive it. We have to re-experience it so that we can review, reevaluate, throw it off, affect evolution, move forward. Okay? So a Venus retrograde person natally can be someone who has not been, many times it can be someone who has not been learning how to create their own value system, who has not been honoring their own needs. And they come in this lifetime and they really feel like they don't fit in. I can't relate to anyone, she smiles. I'm glad we have a Venus retrograde natally in the room. Yes, this will work by progression. Also, when we have Venus transiting retrograde in the sky, it works for mass consciousness during that time period. We're all just coming out of a Venus retrograde. So we can all relate to, over the last 2, 3, 4 months of our lives, just can't relate to doing everything the way that I've used to do it. What used to be important to me just, God, doesn't feel the same over these last few months. My values have changed over the last few months. My needs have changed over the last few months. So I'll repeat that again, but let's work with this natally, because how many of you are counseling astrologers in this room? One? Okay. Okay, so we've got a fair amount of you. I mean, this is something, you don't run into the Venus retrogrades a lot, but this is so valuable. You can change the life of a Venus retrograde person. And that is so important, because that natal Venus retrograde, they can't fit into cultural values and meanings anymore. They've resisted finding their own. And so they're coming in, Venus retrograde, throwing off all kinds of values and conditions. They can't be in relationships the normal way. Many times they've built up a karmic overload of relating issues. And so a Venus retrograde will go through key time periods in this life where they will draw in those karma mates that they have got to relive something with to resolve it, to be able to evolve and move on. So a Venus retrograde person can essentially be a loner, because I just don't relate to anybody. And then when I draw on one of those karma mates, it is so fluffin', intense, I can't do it. I need a break. I want to be alone. Jeffrey said that during all his decades of counseling, 15,000 plus charts, that when he would run into a natal Venus retrograde, and Jeffrey had Venus retrograde natally, by the way, when he would run into a Venus retrograde person, 20% of them had never been in intimate relationships. It was too hard to live with somebody because their whole value system, their whole figuring out what it is that they need was changing so much, such metamorphosis in this lifetime, that it was just hard to establish that intimate relationship with somebody. And typically, a Venus retrograde person will be attracted to people who have strong Uranus, Aquarius, or 11th house energy in their chart. They're trying to rebel from cultural conditionings about how to be in relationships. And so they want somebody else who's also rebelling. And you get somebody who has strong Aquarian energy, Uranian energy in their chart, and they're the rebels. And so they'll relate to those types of people better than anybody else. This makes sense? Understanding? Questions? Hold on. Talking stick.
How does this relate to what you had said earlier in the day about people reliving, we'll say, difficult relationships, or where there might be abuse or violence or whatever? Is that something that someone is just reliving or learning how to deal with, or how does that factor into it?
Okay, good question. Did you all hear? What we were talking about earlier with all of these various relationship types and subtypes and all the combinations you can put together. How does this relate to a Venus retrograde? Obviously, because Venus is a rare retrograde cycle, only retrograde 10% of the time. Only 10% of the souls at any given time alive, more or less, would have Venus retrograde. There's a lot more distortions and redos than just 10% of the people on the planet. The reason for a lot of the distortions in relationships and the relives and the redos is due to the distortions from natural laws and spiritual principles. It's due to the distortions of that more than anything else. However, even if we lived in natural law, even if we were here today without the distortions to the extremes that they are, we'd still be having planetary retrogrades. Why? Because when we go back to the nature of the soul, and the soul with that dual archetype desire nature, what also happens with souls is when we incarnate ourselves into these physical bodies and we start living life, what's also naturally inherent within a soul is the desire to be secure. That also will relate to Venus. You can relate to the stubbornness of Taurus in the second house. That's a desire to be secure, to know what came before, to know what's coming, to feel safe in my world. So security is something that is naturally inherent within souls. Another way to look at it on the astrological wheel is if the soul is related by Pluto, which is where our perspective, where we come from, and that's related to Scorpio in the 8th house. What's opposite that? Venus and its rulership of Taurus in the 2nd house. Souls, security. You see that dichotomy right there? You see that balance that has to go on right there? So what will happen is even in natural law, we have a desire to be secure. We have a desire to have enough food, clothing, shelter, to know our world, to be safe in our world. Okay? That essence of souls to be secure creates a mechanism whereby we all project the past forward. Any planetary archetype will project the past forward. How do we know this? We all know a natal planet by its house and sign. Okay? And we can learn that planetary archetype and its broader descriptions by adding on that sign in that house. Well, all of astrology, not just evolutionary astrology, but almost all branches of astrology can learn there's a polarity over there. There's a polarity point over there. When the unmanifest manifested, the first law that came into being was the law of polarity. The law of manifestation is the law of polarity. Okay? Unmanifest, manifest. We also know it as light, dark, day, night, Good, bad?
Duality.
Duality. Okay? Harmonics of 2. After the harmonics of 2 come the harmonics of 3, the Trinity. Harmony itself. So when you're looking at a planetary archetype that is there by a house and a sign, that's going to tell you how that planetary archetype feels secure. This is my past. This is what I know. That polarity point, that opposite house and sign, is going to be the missing half of information for this archetype. And so you will look at that polarity for objectivity, for the duality, for the broader perspective. When you can take any planetary archetype by its house and sign, and you can go look at the opposite house and opposite sign, you get a wealth of information. And from that wealth of information over there, from that objectivity of the polarity, you then come back and metamorphose the original archetype. Okay? I'm describing lots of things right here. All right? So that security of the soul, or the desire of the soul to be secure, to be consistent, to be safe. That's just natural law, regardless of our archetypes. Okay? So this is what I know. Planets, natal signs, natal houses. But this is where I need to go to grow. And if I do that, then I come back and bring this in. Okay? Here on Earth, if we did not have our planets going retrograde, it wouldn't throw it into chaos enough, even into natural law. We'd want to be stuck. So retrogrades, again, this is how you get that deeper meaning to retrogrades. They help us throw things off. They help throw us into chaos. Doesn't feel secure, but it shakes things up enough to create evolution, to create movement. Okay? So, even in natural law, we would have planetary retrogrades. But all of the distortions to relive, to redo, they're beyond just retrogrades. They're also this fact that we just are so conditioned. Even in natural law, we're conditioned. But the distortions of conditioning in our human consciousness is, we've reached extremes of it. Maybe we can reach more extremes. Who knows? We'll find out. We're at a big crossroads with spirituality and religion that we're going to be finding out over the next however many years, decades it takes. So, maybe multiple answers to the question. Did I help satisfy your mind? Okay. Did it lead to more questions? I know. Big subject. And I'm watching the time. So if I may, just a few more comments on the Venus retrograde thing. So this person who has Venus retrograde natally, even though they're the rare souls on the planet, by understanding them, you understand what we go through, all of us, when Venus is retrograde. I've resisted the evolution of my value system. I've resisted the evolution of my essential needs. And so a Venus retrograde person, I've resisted relating to others. So the Venus retrograde natally is thrown into this deep inner process of relating to themselves. Who am I? What do I need in my life? What's important to me? Those great values. Now, a Venus retrograde person natally will go through this their entire life. When they get in relationships, that relationship better be in the process of metamorphosis, or it will not last for the Venus retrograde person.
I was going to say, does it ever stop? Is there no light at the end of the tunnel?
It is a matter of making peace with the fact that evolution is natural. And the evolution of my values and needs will continue throughout life. There's been a resistance to it from past lives. So you're thrown into it this lifetime to learn it's natural. You will reach moments of plateau where you get satisfied, but then it will start all over again at some point. So it's being comfortable with the process, the cycling. Now, on the deepest levels possible, the Venus retrograde natally is throwing off all of the cultural conditionings and how to be in relationships, how you're expected to be in relationships. On the deepest levels possible, natal Venus retrograde is learning to have the deepest inner relationship possible, and the deepest level in which that is possible is the relationship with Source Energy itself, God, Goddess. That's the ultimate way to find peace when you have Venus retrograde natally. I must activate my spiritual relationship with myself. Now, I have a little cliche that I like to say. The relationship we have with ourselves is identical to the relationship we have with God, Goddess, and vice versa. The way you treat yourself is the way your value system and belief system believes God treats you. Ponder that one. Another question? Somebody have a question?
Would she be willing to give us a report on Venus retrograde from a personal perspective?
Well, I'll give you one. And
Talking, there, hold on.
I will hope that it's sort of, it's a little bit in confidence, because it's, I
Only say what you want on tape.
yeah, what I can say is that you're saying that Venus retrograde has occurred in the last several months. Well, for me, it's been a real tumultuous kind of time. And I'm a person who believes that we get thrown into things because we need to be working through this stuff. So it's been tumultuous, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But, I had to laugh. You're saying that this will pacify me for a while, and I'm not out of the tumultuousness yet, and I'm already thinking, gee, what am I going to do in the fall? And I'm thinking, like, this is silly, because it's been a real kind of different ride here. And and part of it is that I've been moving I retired, and I thought I would have a quiet, peaceful time, and I haven't yet. I'm waiting for it. And I've been moving from the city to the country, to a village of 500 people, where I face out on a field, and all I see is the sunset. And that piece is good. The move has just taken too long. It was supposed to end before the snow was flying, and I just got into my home a week ago. So that's what has been part of it. But so I can really relate to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Venus retrograde natally needs to have those time periods to be alone.
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there comes a time when you need people.
Yep.
You really,
Yep.
really do. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm very lucky that I have found a half a dozen people in my life that are really there for me all the time.
Yeah. A Venus retrograde natally has, they don't have a lot of fluffy relationships. Deep, serious relationships must be people that they trust, because they're encountering all of these karmic relationships out of the blue in which something needs to be healed. And so there can be so much metamorphosis that gets involved in that energy that, there's trust issues.
Very much so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when Venus goes retrograde by transit, we all go through this temporarily. So we're all just coming out of feeling this way. And Venus retrograde in Aries is not the most light and easy retrograde place for Venus. It's the Mars sign. Don't get in my way or I'll bust your chops. Frustration, Mars anger, it's right at the surface. So just a couple more quick things on Venus retrograde, and then when we come back from lunch, I'm going to pick up on Venus through the archetypes, okay? And then I'm going to come up on the essential needs, and then we're going to move into Mars. So we're going to keep clipping? clicking along. So, question, are you okay with this a lot of information? I mean, again, we'll come back from lunch and we'll try and get this whiteboard going. Okay, so I hope I'm describing it in such a way that you're all finding value and information to your own charts as well. The Venus retrograde, you've heard of, some of you may have heard about Venus retrograde cycles make a 5-pointed star. Okay, what happens is that every 584 days, what's that turn out to be? I don't know how long that turns out to be. Every 8 years. Venus goes retrograde once every 584 days. Every 8 years, Venus will make 5 retrograde cycles and come back to the same spot it was at. And the way we've got them going on right now is if you take okay, bear with my drawings, okay, you take the circle and put a star in it, okay, and I'm not matching up to the natural wheel, okay, but the Venus retrogrades will all repeat themselves, and I don't know if I'm going to do this quite right. The Venus retrogrades come back to the same spot once every 8 years. Okay, I got to get this down correctly. And this is kind of where they're going right now. Okay. And we can also put this in here as well. These retrogrades, when they come back to the same spot once every 8 years, Pisces is going to be on the opposite side of where it should be. When they come back to these spots once every 8 years, that Venus retrograde will recede a couple of degrees when it comes back to that same spot. So this Venus retrograde right here that we've had in Aries, it recedes a few degrees in Aries, a few degrees in Aries, a few degrees in Aries. And the point where it goes retrograde, the point where it goes direct, all of those points work. Whether you follow the retrograde point, whether you follow the interior conjunction with the Sun when Venus is retrograde, whether you follow the Venus direct point. They all work, and I'm going to try and move out of the way for you guys. That when it comes back to each of those 5 spots, that's where they are right now in the zodiac, and they recede a few degrees every 8 years. They recede a few days every 8 years. Okay? Whereas, let me see if I can find my notes for you in regards to this. I think I wrote this down. The Venus retrograde, whereas as this time around Venus was retrograde March 6th to April 17th, I'm going to guess because I don't have my notes in front of me. The last time around Venus was retrograde from, say, March 8th. Now it went retrograde March 6th. The last time around Venus went retrograde March 21st. Now it went, or April 21st. Now it went retrograde April 17th. So it's receding backwards a little bit. And approximately every 100 years, Venus retrogrades recede through the signs and go backwards to the next one. And so our Venus retrogrades are going to start being between Aries and Pisces now the next time it comes around in Aries 8 years later. The next Venus retrograde is going to come in March. So the thing of it is when you're looking at Venus retrograde right now, go back 8 years from now. This is 2009. Go back to 2001. Somebody do math for me because I'm so right brain right now. 2001 minus 8 is, thank you, 1993, 1985. You see how I'm doing this? You can go in 8-year increments. So you can look at your own chart where you have Venus in, or where you have Aries, okay? And you have a Venus retrograde there every 8 years. 2009, 2001, 93, 85. You can keep going back for yourself in history. And each one of these 5 points in the Venus retrogrades, you can look at these in your chart. And those of you who have ephemerides, you can go back, or if you got computers that do the printouts, you can go back in those 8-year increments. And you can really get information about yourself with these Venus retrograde cycles happening in the same spot. So Venus retrograde in Aries. I love what Daniel Guillamario says about that. How many of you know who Daniel Guillamario is? Some of you do. He has a type of astrology he calls shamanic astrology, and he's really working with people about actually getting back out into the nighttime sky and watching the inner planets that you can visibly see. He calls Venus retrograde in Aries the warrior goddess, the Amazon goddess. Venus is in Mars's sign. Venus is in the masculine sign. So Venus, who is more passive and attracting by nature, when it's in Aries, it is just the rebel. It is, it's the mama bear, don't you dare get near my cub. It brings out the, what's her name? The wild woman. Women Who Run with Wolves. Clarissa somebody. Remember that book? Yes. That book was very popular. If I remember correctly, in 1993, two Venus and Aries retrograde cycles ago. Did I say that right? Okay, so this was the only point that I did want to make. Even though Venus is a rare retrograde, it's a very beautiful, beautiful retrograde cycle that you can follow in your own chart through reflection, which is Venus many times as well, reflecting on what our values are, what is important to me. When Venus goes retrograde, all the values get thrown into chaos. What we thought made us happy before doesn't anymore. And so Venus retrograde is a time period to review our value systems and reestablish new values, which as Venus goes direct, we're just getting ready to come through that. You all know through the retrograde cycle that any planetary retrograde makes 3 passages. The first area, the first time it moves through degrees of the zodiac, which is the beginning shadow time period. Then you have it reversing through those same degrees a second time, the retrograde, review, throw off, the most frustrating part. Then it moves through that third time, the ending shadow, which is the resolutions and all that kind of stuff. Now, I'll swear that 3 strikes, you're out. I have a baseball husband. 3 strikes, you're out. Three chances to get it right. All those sayings with that triplicacy in them, that's got to be our planetary retrograde. That first passage brings up the issues. Second passage, throw it off, deal with it. Third passage, bring it to resolution. That's natural with all planetary retrogrades. Mike.
It's just a talking
stick.
Okay, so you're talking about archetypes, and just as it relates to, integrating this information, what's the, why archetypes, why the relevance of archetypes? I mean, archetypes is just like, at this point, I mean, it's a word to me. So I really I need to know from you why it's so important, what we need to pay attention to, why we need to pay attention to it. And why archetypes? As a learning tool for our own spiritual journey.
Sure, okay. Basically because astrology is an archetypical language. And what we've done in our modern westernized world and our westernized cultures, we've transferred it all over into our left brain. So you buy your Happy Astrology book and it says, this archetype is one size fits all. And so you start trying to put all the pieces together and you're not understanding it from deeper levels. You're understanding, it's like how many of our westernized learning is. We are memorizing information rather than understanding the meaning behind the words. And so that's why evolutionary astrology will so teach and help people understand that it's more than just words. So the planet Venus is more than just the word values. The planet Venus is a whole archetypical spectrum of meaning that can be distorted or naturally expressed. As I go through Venus, through all of the signs, all of the 12 archetypes, then we'll briefly look at a distortion versus natural expression, okay? So human beings have both a left brain and a right brain, and we're meant to work whole brain. But in our westernized cultures, we've just divorced ourselves from the right brain. We've divorced ourselves from the deeper symbologies and meanings behind words. Okay? Now, am I answering your question completely, or is there more to the question?
Just what can we learn? What can we learn? Why the relevance? Maybe you have. Why the word? I guess the overall relevance. Well, I guess you answered it. I suppose I have, some other questions. I'm not sure that I'm really able to articulate them at this point. The validity. That's a good way of putting it. The validity.
The validity of the archetypes have been based upon thousands of years of observing and correlating and observing this planet we call Venus, and being able to correlate meaning to it. I mean, that's what an archetype is that big, deep meaning behind just symbology of words. And evolutionary astrology comes from observe it, correlate it. As above, so below. As within, so without. Is that what you're trying?
Well, I understand that. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
That conceptual.
Yeah. So I'm trying to understand if there's more directness to the question.
I think once we start getting into the signs,
Yes.
it'll become.
That might help.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you put a name to it, right?
Yeah.
Go with Venus.
Let's try that. Let's try going through Venus through the 12 archetypes, okay? And then we can see if that still feels comfortable for you. And at the end of that, if the question still exists, you might have another way of asking the question, or I may have another way of hearing it.
Okay.
Work? Okay. One of the things about okay, first of all, anybody else questions? I'll be up and down the chair, but that's okay.
I just wanted to say, for archetypes for myself, it gives it more personality. And so when you have Venus, you can think of the goddess Venus. And then when you have those personality traits, when it becomes, to me, a real person, then I know that as a friend of this or whatever. And so I can think of Mars as a man or a warrior. I can think of it in human terms rather than just thinking of the signs and the glyphs. So I don't know if that helps you.
Yeah, it does. Just in terms of, I understand what you're saying. So
Okay.
So she helped to clarify that. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. Anytime you got questions, it's always okay to interrupt. All right? And so in what I was popping off of as I was listening to her, we have a tendency to think as Venus is female and feminine. But you look at any male chart, they have a Venus. So when you start to go into it more of an archetypical way, we can sometimes get it out of gender when it comes to Venus and Mars. Even though Venus will always relate to the feminine principle, Mars will always relate to the masculine principle. Any chart has both a Venus and Mars. Any soul has a feminine side and a masculine side of themselves. But when we were talking about perhaps the 12 archetypes, which are the 12 signs, or as we like to say, the 12 sign houses, because we can use the meaning behind the archetype of a sign and the meaning behind the archetype of a house to be similar when it's Aries, to be similar when it's a sign and house that would relate to Taurus. Okay, so when you go through the zodiacal wheel, you know where Aries is in the circle, right? You know where you start with Aries in the circle, and you know that also is the first house okay, and then you know Taurus second, Gemini third. When you make it in, when you transfer that 12 archetype into a birth chart, the houses are always stationary, but the signs start to shift around that circle. And that's where you start to have to do the synthesis of blending a sign and a house to a planet. Okay? All right? Okay. So a couple of other things that I wanted to go through from my notes is I wanted to work a little bit about Venus with its relationship to Libra. Okay, and so the duality of Venus-Taurus, Venus rulership of Taurus, Venus rulership of Libra. And then I wanted to go through Venus through all the 12 signs, houses, okay? And you're each in your own personal way going to relate to 2 of those 12. And that's going to be your blend that you're going to have to put together for each of you, all right? And then while I'm going through those 12 archetypes, I'm going to try and go over to that polarity so you can see that evolution that you're going to be reaching for. And I'll also try and work in a little bit of the retrograde, a little bit of distortions through versus natural expressions. So we're going to go through the 12 main archetypes of the zodiac, okay? And we're going to do them via Venus. And then if we get enough time this afternoon, we'll do them through Mars. Okay, so that'll start to help to relate in. When we are looking at beginners to astrology, what we say in evolutionary astrology is to really learn the 12 archetypes, Aries through Pisces. And when you can learn those 12 archetypes, then that's going to be like a foundation of interpretation for you. Because then you can take the methodology, which for us is Pluto and the nodes of the moon. Or you can take this essential needs formula that we're going to work with. When you get those 12 archetypes down, those 12 archetypes will lend you to understanding the energy behind the planets, the planetary principles of energy. Okay? Those 12 archetypes will then help you then start to understand various astrological methodologies or formulas that astrologers can put together. Okay, making sense? Understanding with this? Okay, so a little bit about the Venus relationship to Taurus. And excuse me with this thing, I have to get it back so it doesn't bother me. Or excuse me, Venus Libra. Again, the inner side of Venus Taurus is that inner relationship we have with ourself. And we come from the foundation that we must be successful with our own self-relationship in order to be successful with relationships with others. We have a tendency to want to skip over me and get to him or her or them, to get to the other person. And so this is where Venus will then come in through its rulership of Libra and represent the initiation of relationships outside of ourself. The first half of the zodiac, Aries through Virgo, relates to self. The second half of the zodiac, Libra through Pisces, relates to others. So Libra, initiating the second half of the zodiac, is the diversification of relationships we can have with everybody else in the world, all the different people that we relate to. And Libra is opposite Aries on the chart, the first sign of the zodiac. So Aries, that me first, Libra, everybody else. And so through this diversification of relationships that we relate to, we can then learn more about who we want to be in relationship with. So the Libra side of Venus is the giving and receiving we start to do in relationships. The Libra side of Venus is what we will also call the psychology of listening, the psychology of hearing. Whereas Mercury rules the anatomy, the physical ability of the ear to hear. Venus, through Libra, relates to the psychology of hearing. How many times have you said, my partner can't hear me? That's a deep meaning to Libra, that giving and receiving, that learning how to be in equality, These are all other attributes that start to come into Venus when we're working with our relationships. And so we can only give to another person to the degree we understand that other person and what they need and what they want. And so this is where that psychology of hearing starts to come in with Venus. And this is a part of Venus that's not talked about a lot in general astrology. You know, and it's a beautiful way to understand Libra. Because Libra is always about giving and receiving. Libra is also about, you know, one of the things about Libra, because it initiates the second half of the zodiac and it starts getting into giving and receiving. What gets involved with that is Libra Libra is always trying to osmosis itself in with another person or relate to another person. And so Libra gets into that giving to be needed, or the need to be needed. You run around with those Libra people, or you see anybody with a lot of Libra energy in their chart, and you sense that neediness. You know, whereas Aries, I'm going to tell you what I want, and then I'm going to run off, or I'm going to leave. I'm going to interrupt the conversation. I'm going to do whatever I need to do, Aries. Libra's like, well, okay, yeah, I got to go. But, you know, so Libra will just, that need to be needed. Libra doesn't know how to separate itself from somebody else. It can, and so that Venus can get caught, the Libra side of Venus can get so caught up in wanting to be with somebody else that they can get clingy. That's that need to be needed. Okay? And so a Venus retrograde, by in and of itself, is going to take all of those relationships we have with everybody else and throw Libra back to Aries. Okay? Throw us back in upon ourselves. Oh, I must have a relationship with myself before I can metamorphose my relationships with others.
You're saying that's what Venus retrograde does?
Yes.
Okay. Throws it back to the Libra side.
Venus retrograde throws us back into ourself. It takes the Libra side of Venus and throws it back to Aries, opposite of Libra. So Venus retrograde throws us back into redefining our relationship with ourself, which will automatically then redefine our relationships with others. Make sense?
Clear.
Yeah. So, okay, let's see how fast I can go through Libra and the zodiac. Venus in Aries, we are initiating a brand new cycle of values and needs. We are initiating a brand new cycle of how we desire to be in relationships. And Aries, as the first sign of the zodiac, it's not a concrete vision. It's not already formed as something we know. All we know is the past that came before it that doesn't work anymore. And so the archetype of Aries is the beginning of the zodiac is just, we like to call it the starburst. That's the word we found over these last few months, because Aries is fire, and it's active cardinal fire. And so it's initiating energy out all over. So Venus in Aries, give me my freedom. I got to figure out what I want and who I want it with. And so if we're already in a committed relationship, that makes it a little tough. And we have a partner doing the same thing, because Venus in Aries creates it for everybody. So Aries will run into its polarity, Libra. And it's the partner, it's the feedback saying, wait a minute, you can't just go out there and do whatever you want. You must have, Aries initiates, and it has to have a reaction to the initiation of energy in order to get the feedback for it to evolve to the next step. So another thing with fire signs, all three of the fire signs, this would be Aries, Leo, and Sag. Because fire feels like it has this spark of energy that's coming through. It lends itself to this feeling of spirit, consciousness, and it's got to have some manifestation. And so it lends itself to feelings of special destiny. And so this is this fiery energy that tends to come through with all the fire signs. And with Aries, it's very unformed. I know there's just some relationship out there that's going to work for me and be magical and make it all work. And maybe it's that one. Maybe it's that one. You know, and so Aries is just all over the place. And so when Venus is retrograde in Aries, it slows us down and says, we run up against all those other people in our life that says, oh, wait a minute, that might be your idea, but it's not mine. You know, this is what I need. This is what I think should happen in the relationship. So a Venus retrograde in Aries will automatically lend itself to looking towards Libra. Now, do you relate that to what I said earlier? The Libra side of Venus, when Venus is retrograde, Libra points back to Aries. Now we've had Venus in Aries retrograde, points to the polarity Libra. Anybody confused yet? Where are my relationships? What the fluff is going on in my relationships? This is the Aries-Libra archetype, okay, that we run into. Now, distortions of the Aries archetype, Venus in Aries, selfishness. That's a distortion of Aries. It's me first. It's my idea. If you just allow me to be in charge and in lead and you just follow along like you should, everything will be just fine. Natural expressions of Aries. If we didn't have Venus in Aries every so often, we get really bored because Aries allows us to rebirth and reinitiate new values, new needs coming through. We are not static beings as much as we want to be secure. We're always in that process of evolution. So the natural expression of Aries is the freedom, but it's the freedom to rebirth. It's spring. It's the spring equinox. Okay. This is brief, succinct questions with Aries. Venus in Taurus. Venus in Taurus is going to be very similar to all that we much of what we have talked about this morning. When Venus rules Taurus, so somebody who has Venus in Taurus is going, their values are going to be utmost important to them. And Venus will find security through its values, through what it determines it needs. Remember those essential needs? We start with food, clothing, and shelter. We don't feel secure if we don't have our needs met. And once we have basic needs met, we can go on to the finer needs that Taurus and Venus in Taurus is known for. Now, Taurus is fixed earth, okay? Passive fixed earth. Let me back up. Does everybody here understand the law of polarity, or the harmonics of two through the zodiac? Active, passive, active, passive. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. The 12 signs of the zodiac in the law of the harmonics of two alternate between active and passive, active and passive. Okay? The 12 signs of the zodiac through the harmonics of three relate to what we call the three modalities of action. And those are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So we go through the 12 signs, Aries through Pisces, cardinal, fixed, mutable, cardinal, fixed, mutable. Okay, so I said Aries was cardinal, active, fire. Taurus is passive, fixed, earth. Now, if you're a beginner to astrology, you just take out the 12 signs and you go across the board and you go Aries, Gemini, Taurus, Pisces. And then you write active, passive. Underneath that, you write the three modalities. Underneath that, you take the harmonics of 4 divided into 12, and those are the 4 elements. Fire, earth, air, and water. And so that's going to be one of the most simplest ways for you to be able to take those 12 archetypes and understand them to start helping you if you need some left brain keywords. So now you can again see how Aries is active, cardinal, fire. Taurus is passive, fixed earth. Okay? The next one, Gemini, is going to be back to active again. Okay? And it's going to be mutable air. So this is a great way to be able to help yourself with taking all those words that describe any one of the 12 signs houses and being able to make some sense out of all those words. Okay? Oh, Venus, security. Oh, passive, fixed, earth. Give me my physical stuff. Okay? So when we have Venus in Taurus, we're going to be concerned about possessions. We're going to be concerned about securities. We're going to be concerned about, again, those values and needs that Venus has. The polarity of Venus is Scorpio. And we've all heard those stories about Scorpio relating to Plutonian eruptions and confrontations and upsetting the apple cart. That is Scorpio's purpose from Taurus's perspective, is to shake us up and get us unstuck. Because if we get too set up in inertia, Taurus, we're very comfortable, we're very secure. If Venus in Taurus goes, you know, I like my house the way it is, I like this partner the way it is, he doesn't satisfy my needs, but it's easier to remain in this relationship to get out of it. What does the partner do? Scorpio polarity, he goes off and has an affair and upsets the apple cart. Okay? If you've read the Pluto books, the Taurus archetype will be called the frog in the well. Frog is always secure at the bottom of the well. It can see all the way around. It feels really nice here, but it's missing the rest of the world. So every so often, the frog gets thrown out of the well, and it has to recreate security. Okay? So distortions of the Venus and Taurus archetype is refusing to change values, refusing to get unstuck with what they perceive their needs are. Typical distortion of Venus in Aries is my possessions represent my security. Well, when we get too caught up in our outer possessions representing security, the universe, evolution, will come along and take away our physical possessions. Throws us into chaos. The purpose of removing the physical for the earth signs is to draw it inward, to find an inner self-reliance. So you see this deepening of the Taurus archetype? And Venus in Taurus is always having physical possessions and relationships removed to throw it back in upon itself, to have it really become more self-reliant. The natural expressions of Taurus: self-reliance, self-sufficiency, an ability to take care of whatever self needs, the perception of what we need.
I have a question for you.
Hold on. That's okay.
And I don't know how exactly I'm going to ask this, but when you have natural disasters like Katrina, or you have something like that, is that a Plutonian taking away in a water sign for that area? Or like air, would it be like a tornado coming through here?
Can be. If you follow the outer planets through the signs,
Okay.
natural disasters can have a tendency to follow the element of that sign the outer planet is in.
Okay.
Nothing is an absolute, but that's the tendency.
Okay.
Okay? For instance, when we had Pluto in Scorpio from 1983-84 to 1995, what became the buzzword in regards to the collective groups? AIDS. AIDS was passed by fluids. Scorpio is a water sign. Okay? So, yes. And then that can go all the way down to somebody's personal chart, and you can relate it to the personal archetypes, be they whatever the planetary archetypes are. And so, hold on, another question?
Well, it's related, basically. It's just related to what we experienced here with all the flooding that we've had.
south of the city, and specifically north of the city, and all of the, the destruction and all the, like the huge changes that are going to come about as a result of people losing their, the place where they live, not only their homes, but the place that we lived. So Katrina is important, but I mean, we lived through this, and we're still living through it. It's not done yet. So, I don't know, I guess what I'm doing is just saying something in addition to what you said about Katrina, because we lived through, and we are living through, a huge natural disaster here, being in the Red River Valley.
Yes.
And like it's enormous, enormous, enormous. So
Flooding, water, Uranus in Pisces, these Saturn-Uranus oppositions have been leading to, that's where the water comes in.
okay, so what would it say about the people that were drawn to live where in disaster zones? Is there a correlation?
We were kind
Why
of
would-
talking
oh
about
my
this. We were talking about this at dinner last night, and we didn't, come with the astrological correlations, but Chris was actually saying the words. Uranus in Pisces. Uranus in evolutionary astrology is the individuated unconsciousness. So what we're unconscious of, and when it's in water, Uranus in Pisces is unconscious water or unconscious emotions, escapism. Just give me my checkout. The last time we had Uranus in Pisces was the 1920s with the Prohibition. And remember the little flapper girls and whatever they called that, Uranus in Pisces. God, I could talk for hours on this. So Uranus is archetype is deconditioning and liberation, okay? And when it's in Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac, we've got to decondition from anything we haven't deconditioned from yet, in whatever ways, individually, where it is in your chart by house, okay? Collectively as a whole group. And so Uranus in Pisces is such an interesting archetype because I just want to float away. I just want to check out. Water, path of least resistance. So what does it say about the people collectively? It's all the people who didn't pay any attention to buying a house in the floodplain, let alone having collective laws of building communities in the floodplain. We're now making that conscious to learn it on a new level, a different level, to figure out, maybe we should change our zoning laws. Maybe we should learn how to, anybody who lost their home might have to have, the community support to relocate a little further uphill. So anyway, I don't want to get off track, but Saturn in Virgo, facing the realities. Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
The Earth, this is the reality of planet Earth. Saturn, Uranus, opposition.
Well, what about this flu that's coming up through Mexico, the bovine flu? Because we're going through two cancer countries, the United States and Canada, and I'm not sure what Mexico is.
I don't either, but that's another whole big subject, and I'll sidetrack on that, and then I'm going to move us back on. Neptune. Neptune rules the immune system. Neptune in an air sign, Aquarius, 1998 through 2011. This is going to be health disasters relating to the air. Air knows no boundaries. So your flu imbalances are viral. Okay, viruses and bacteria, fungi and prions are all ruled by Pluto. And so you have to give me back for health and wellness if you want to go into a lot of detail. You powering down, Leroy? Is that you?
I'm sorry,
Okay.
yeah.
But back to Neptune rules the immune system, and Aquarius is air. So viruses pass through the air that affect the immune system. So if you remind me about this, at the end of the day, I actually have another occupation. And there's some very important things that I would love to say just briefly about that. And I came with some giftings for you guys that I will share with you guys at the end of the day in regards to information. There are more airborne toxins in our modern world than we have ever had, and they're not organic. They are inorganic or man-made, and they've been released into our environment for the last 10, 15 years, all the way through Neptune and Aquarius, and it's really suppressing the immune systems. And then there's things like TB, airborne bacteria, that used to have to be passed by really close contact. TB is something that's TB, it used to have to be passed by contact. It's naturally mutated to be airborne. Before you had to be close enough to somebody and they sneezed, generations ago. Now it can just mutate into the air all on its own in various ways. So we're opening up Pandora's box. I have to focus.
It's too bad you don't live here.
That is true. I don't think you're going to get me out of my mountains. I have 5 planets in the ninth, and I have a Capricorn rising. I like that mountaintop.
Didn't you see the hill and say Bonk
Might not be enough elevation. So back to continuing through the archetypes today. Venus now in Gemini, okay?
Are you going to do the Venus and Taurus natural?
Venus in Taurus natural is self-reliance and self-sufficiency and being able to take care of all your own needs yourself, be you male or female. We should be raising children so that by the time they reach puberty, Venus, Taurus, masturbation, they know how to take care of all their own needs, and it's not taboo. Not only their sexual needs, but their needs to be able to survive. In natural law, by the time children reach puberty, they knew how to live as functioning adults. Now we delay that until they're 18, or, we set these arbitrary ages, and suddenly when they reach that age, they're magically supposed to know what they're going to do with themselves. And, we don't teach self-sufficiency, and that's the natural expression of Venus and Taurus. And as you're evolving Venus and Taurus from consensus to individuated to spirituated, you learn that security becomes less and less outwardly based and more inwardly based. As you are evolving Venus in Aries, from consensus individuated, spirituated, Venus in Aries know when it needs to be a goddess warrior and shake up something that is distorted to, shake up the energy to then rearrange it, or to get others to consider, others, Libra, to consider something different, something new.
I have to just digress and tell this story.
Will you tell it on tape?
I can tell it on tape. I guess for me astrology is very new, but I'm always sort of putting out the arrows, and I have these 2 tradespeople that I work with. Actually, they're electricians, and ever since I've met them, I've sort of talked about astrology. Well, my final straw was I decided in my new place I wanted a room painted blue, and my son wanted yellow. And I have a moon fixture in my room, and he has a sun fixture in his. And so when the electricians were putting up the moon and the sun, I said, there it is, guys, you got to take it or leave it, and they're sort of beginning to see what I function like, whether they accept it or not. It's kind of funny, and I have to laugh, but it's very visible there, so, yeah.
Yeah.
So your room was blue with the moon, and his room was yellow with the sun?
Right. It's a little hokey, but it's out there.
Well,
It's not
Venus
in
retrograde natally, it doesn't matter how hokey it is. It matters whether or not it works for you and satisfies your values.
You're right there, yeah.
Venus in Gemini. Okay, again, this is, help me out if I do this wrong, okay, because I'm having to shift from left brain to right brain. active, mutable air. And so, you know, Gemini in the 3rd house, well, is ruled by Mercury. So you might write Mercury on the side to understand this for the 12 archetypes. But when you put Venus in Gemini, it's come out of the fixed energy of Taurus. And now Venus in Gemini needs to explore. It wants to diversify its values. It wants to add on more ideas about what works for Venus in Gemini. Well, today I value this, and tomorrow I value that. And what Venus in Gemini is having to learn, you know, through the Sagittarius polarity, okay, is that there's many paths home, and everybody is entitled to their own value system. Everybody's entitled to determine what needs work for them. When you distort Venus in Gemini wants to tell everybody else what's best for them. Venus in Gemini, you know, starts making judgments about somebody else's value system or needs. Venus in Gemini will, the classic with the Gemini archetype is looking for the weak link in somebody else's philosophy, polarity Sag, and Gemini starts arguing it. So Venus in Gemini will start, you know, saying to a partner, I don't know why you want X, Y, Z. I don't understand. That just isn't important. But Venus in Gemini can have its own absurd values and needs and think, well, why doesn't everybody else think the way I do? And so a natural expression of Venus in Gemini is being able to open up and have acceptance towards the diversity of values and needs that human consciousness can have. And so as you're evolving the Gemini archetype, Venus in Gemini evolving is really learning to understand that whole principle of there are many paths home. There are many ways to get to the same place. And Venus in Gemini allows diversity to naturally exist. Now, sometimes Venus in Gemini, another distortion of Venus in Gemini, is adopting everybody else's values and needs versus going, these are mine. Don't care how different they are. Okay, so that Gemini distortion is going all over the place from moment to moment rather than settling in on what's unique to it and being okay, not judging it, not taking on somebody else's values. Clear?
No.
Can you see? Okay.
Okay, so to my mind, the way that I've understood it, I see a bit of a contradiction here because you were saying, at least this is what I gathered, is that Venus in Gemini starts making judgments about the value systems of others, and then you went on to say that it also allows the diversity of other people or other situations to naturally exist. So are you speaking to the duality in Gemini, when you talk about those two things, because they're polar opposites?
Yes, exactly. And that's the whole thing about Gemini with it being air. All of the air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, deal with duality.
Even Aquarius?
Yes. Have you ever seen an Aquarius who thinks it's the know-it-all?
That's me.
Versus the Aquarius who gets very group oriented. What's the group want to do?
True.
So all of the air signs have duality.
Very good.
So the duality of Gemini, and I'm glad you pointed it out though, because the duality of Gemini is on one extreme, Gemini is always going, well, my way or the highway. My way is the best way. And the other extreme of Gemini is every way and can't make up its mind. So both of these extremes, my way or the highway, the polarity Sag says, you know, wait a minute, everybody can choose the way they want to go. The Gemini extreme over here that is just all over the place and can't make up their mind, the polarity of Sag says, come on, just make up your mind and be who you are. So, you know, Gemini is learning that diversity and realizing that, again, help me out, active, mutable air. It's all over the place. And it can, you know, and here's another distortion when Gemini, because Gemini and its rulership by Mercury will relate to the left brain. Okay, and so if I have just one more fact, if I have just one more detail, if I have just one more piece of information, I know I'm going to have it all together. And Gemini can't get enough information. As a matter of fact, when Gemini gets too much information, what happens to it is it involutes. It just has to put its hands up in the air, and it gets saturated, and it goes catonic, and it has to wait for Sag, the right brain, to go, oh, that's the answer. So that's the polarity of Gemini-Sag. So Venus in Gemini can be trying on so many values it doesn't come up with one. Or Venus in Gemini can, you know, it's trying to, what Venus in Gemini has to learn is my value system is always in a process of change and metamorphosis. One of the EA, mutable. The modality of being mutable is adaptable, changeable. I mean, I'm married to third house Pluto. He's got a Gemini soul. Whatever you want, honey. You know, and then every once in a while he goes, I know you're real fixed and I'm real adaptable, but this is my opinion on this one. You know, so Gemini has to learn when to go with the flow and when to stop being mutable, reach for its Sag polarity and go, this is my thought. This is my, you know, understanding. Okay? So again, the Venus retrograde in Gemini has got to go over to that right brain. And it's got to intuit what feels right as values, Venus in Gemini. Okay? And evolving Venus in Gemini is very diversified without giving up itself.
So can I just for clarification here? Okay, so when we're talking about polarities, so Gemini has a polarity within its sign, and it also has another polarity relationship with Sagittarius.
Polarity.
A duality.
Yeah, duality within the sign.
Duality within the sign,
Sorry.
and polarity relationship with Sagittarius.
Yes.
Okay. I don't
Good
know.
one.
Okay.
Good clarify.
Yeah, thanks.
Good clarification. Yeah, help me out, Chris, especially this afternoon. Yes. But so you're starting to grasp these 12 archetypes. I'm trying to focus it through Venus, but you're starting to grasp these 12 different archetypes as we're starting to go through them. And again, you know, each of the 12 signs has a polarity. And life, first law of polarity, law of duality. It exists in a gazillion different ways. So Venus in Cancer, or the 4th house. Now again, are you shifting over when I'm talking about Venus right here? Any of you who have Venus in the 3rd house of your natal chart, did you just relate to all that? I heard a giggle. Maybe. Venus in Cancer. Okay? So Cancer is now active, passive, thank you. Passive cardinal water. Passive cardinal. Does that explain Cancer? Any of you know this? Yeah. Water, emotions. Emotions going all over the place. There are passive and cardinal. Cardinal's initiating. Okay? Cardinal initiates. I don't know if I said that. The 3 modalities, cardinal initiates, fixed, sustains, mutable adapts, just like they sound. Okay? But Venus in Cancer, I married one. Very, very sensitive souls. Very, very sensitive. They're, you know, it's, first of all, it's water. So this is Venus in a water sign. So our values and needs are emotionally based. And when you put it in Cancer, one of the things you understand about the archetype of Cancer is, and you'll get this through the fact that it's passive, cardinal water. Passive means attracting it in. Cardinal means initiating. Okay? So can you see how Cancer emotions go back and forth and back and forth? Eileen, you getting what we were saying earlier?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens with Cancer, and this is what's not always explained, you know, you learn that Cancer, the crab, never goes in a straight line. It just wiggle-waggles all over the place. Well, what's underneath that? What's the archetypical meaning underneath that? Cancer is what has two distinct emotional cycles, emotional animation and emotional withdrawal. So Venus in Cancer will vacillate back and forth between emotional animation and emotional withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal means something triggered me emotionally and I close in upon myself to figure out my emotions, to figure out what's going on for me. I put up the vacant sign so everybody, everybody can just feel when a Cancer, puts up that wall and says, leave me alone. And so Venus in Cancer, when they get triggered into that withdrawal cycle, they're going within to try and figure out what triggered them emotionally. What's happening usually is unconscious emotions are being made conscious. Once they figure out what's triggered them emotionally, then the Cancer archetype goes back into its opposite emotional cycle, which is emotional animation. You've also seen the Cancers when they're happy-go-lucky, when they want to just relate to you and they want to talk it all out. Venus in Cancer goes, this feels so good, I just want to do it some more. And then they get triggered. Leave me alone. So any of the planetary archetypes will go through this if they're in Cancer or the fourth house, by the way. So Venus in Cancer, it's got these shifting emotional needs. Venus needs all the time. It's got these shifting values all the time, okay? And so Venus in Cancer, they're extremely sensitive. They get sensitized by all their surroundings, and that's sometimes, again, why they have to be careful what they're in. Their polarity Capricorn is Earth. And so sometimes Venus in Cancer just has to put its feet on the ground to try and, sometimes Venus in Cancers or a lot of planets in Cancer or the fourth house, when they're upset, tell them to go lay on the earth, because that can help ground their emotional body that's all over the place. Cancer starts getting into, it's ruled by the moon, so there's all the feminine energy that starts to go on with this. But the distortions of Venus in Cancer is they can get wildly emotional, or they get catatonic, they close down emotionally. Venus in Cancer or the fourth house, it's too painful to be in relationship, so I'm just going to isolate myself and I'm not going to relate to anybody. Or another distortion of Venus in Cancer, men and women, I'm going to look for the parental Capricorn figure who will take care of me. So if you have Venus or Cancer in that fourth house, sometimes what you have is all these distortions on emotional levels from a child. You get those famous emotional displacements, as they're called. And so Venus in Cancer, to evolve it, has to learn how to mature. It has to go through emotional maturity, and it has to learn how to find its own values. It has to learn how to figure out what its own needs are, rather than allowing that polarity Capricorn to just tell it what it needs.
probably me being a beginner and just realizing, but I was just looking on the chart here. All of the water ones are crossed with earth, and all of the fire are crossed with air. And just thinking that through, that if you don't have the boundaries of earth, and you don't have the boundaries of the water could spread out all over the table if I knock the glass. And then that they each feed each other.
Forgot. Yes.
That they each feed each other, because fire and air would feed
Yes.
each other. So
Yes.
I was just thinking of the,
In astrology, they're just called natural affinities.
okay,
Okay? Water and earth have a tendency to get along. Fire and air have a tendency to get along. They can both distort each other, you know. You can see how fire and air work, but you can find all four elements relate.
okay.
To each
But I
other.
was just noticing on the
Yes.
charts that
Yes.
that they were the opposites.
Yes. Good thing to notice as a beginner. Yep. If you look at the modalities, okay, which are cardinal, fixed, and mutable, the 4 cardinals, the 4 fixed, the 4 mutable. Okay, cardinal opposes cardinal, fixed opposes fixed. Okay, same thing with active and passives. Okay, you have an active and an active, a passive and a passive. So they're just the own symbology of their relationships. And subjects unto themselves again. What you start to learn when, again, this is why, can you imagine why some of the masses who pick up their first cookbook astrology book go, phew. My joke is, job security. But this will also then go back to how many of us think life is simple? How many of us think life is complicated? So astrology, so speaks Neptune.
You get born and you die.
Yeah. And so this is what yes, I like to say truth is simple. So we got to take the complexities and make them simple. But you know, astrology is a complex language, and you know, it is a search to figure out how to simplify it and make it learnable for the masses. Okay, so Cancer. Anything I'm forgetting with Venus and Cancer? The natural expressions of Venus and Cancer are just being able to be in their emotional body and flow with all the emotions that come through. Venus, Cancer ruled by the moon will relate to emotions. Venus will also relate to feelings. So Venus in Cancer, I just got to feel my emotions and feel them moment by moment. And Venus in Cancer in its natural expression will recognize water flows. Water goes wherever it can go. Okay, so natural expressions of Venus in Cancer are just being able to allow their emotions to ebb and flow, and to base their values and needs upon how it feels to them. This feels like a value I can adopt. Okay? All right, I'm getting a little speed up, or we'll never get through today. We're never going to get to Mars.
Can I just say something that's relevant as it relates to Venus and Cancer?
Venus in Cancer, as you know, has a tendency to have affairs outside of the marriage. So what is that? Is that a natural affinity or a distortion?
I know Venus in all 12 signs to have affairs.
Oh, just from what I've read, from what I've read about Venus and Cancer, and having had experience with.
I've not
No?
related to that.
Okay.
No. I would say the Venus in Cancers who never learn how to grow up are always trying to look for the parent in the affair. But no, Venus is, their affairs are not related to Venus in a specific sign or a house. There's not a Venus in the zodiac who's not capable of having an affair. Yeah. I put that down more to the distortions of human-made conditionings. Okay? Not being, the death us till death us do part stuff. That creates the affairs rather than naturally ending on a relationship before following through on the next attraction that comes along. Okay? Good comment, though, because it brought up clarity.
More than one book.
Yeah. No. No. The only way I could relate to Venus in Cancer relating to affairs was if the Venus in Cancer was distorted, was not emotionally self-reliant. Then they would go they would go looking for somebody else to replace the parent who never met their needs growing up. And so that's where Venus in Cancer has to learn how to emotionally mature Capricorn polarity, maturity, so that they are finding how to meet their needs, Venus, within inside themselves and their emotional body, Cancer. Okay? And then they don't have to look for the missing parent. They can learn how to grow up, Cancer, and have an equal relationship. Venus duality, or Venus rulership of Libra. Okay, we gotta go faster, but I guess we need these 12 archetypes, huh? Venus in Virgo. No, Venus in Leo. Oh, sorry, Leo.
Because you wanted to go faster. Just because we don't want to talk about Venus and Leo. Excuse me. We know it can take about 20 minutes. We want to get rid of it.
Now, if I was suspect the cookbooks of saying anything, it would be that Venus in Leo has the affairs. Okay, so Leo is active, fixed, fire. Active, fixed, fire. So we're back to the element of fire again. We're repeating fire. So Venus in Leo, love me, love me, love me. Venus in Leo is just going to take all of those qualities. Now, here's the deeper meanings to the archetype of Leo. Leo's ruled by the sun. So you can write the sun in there in the 5th house. Okay, this is Leo, sun, 5th house. The archetype of Leo is creative self-actualization. Fire sign, creativity. All the fire signs have creativity. So Leo is where if we've accomplished the first 4 elements and we start over again with fire, Leo is where we're bursting forth with that creativity, and whereas with Aries, in the first fire sign, it was totally unformed, don't know where it's going. Leo is fixed fire. So Leo goes, I know what I want to do with my creativity. I know who I want to love me, Venus in Leo says, and I know who I want to love. Why are they ignoring me? Aquarius polarity. Why are they just skipping right over me? Okay? So Leo in EA, we will look at Leo as being the one on top of the pyramid. And in Virgo, we're going to flip it over, okay? But and so Leo is where the fullness of self comes through. There's the ego part of the sun and the self-creativity, that creative self-actualization that's going to come through. If we didn't have a sun or a Leo or a 5th house energy in our chart, none of us would be able to get out of bed in the morning. I mean, think of the sun in the solar system as a life force. And so Leo does get a bad rap. Now, the distortions of Leo, all the fire signs can be selfish. The distortions of Leo, Venus in Leo can be just so giving when it's excited about, the new love that's come into its life. But Venus in Leo, as many of the Leo and fifth house archetypes, they give from their own perspective rather than Aquarius. And in EA, the Aquarius polarity is learning objectivity. Aquarius, the group. Leo, me. Me versus them. Okay, so the distortions of Venus in Leo is everything centers around self. And the polarity Aquarius teaches them that they've got to be able to look outside of themselves to see what another needs to actually give, Venus, giving and receiving, what somebody else needs. And in the same respect, the Venus and Leo person, you know, they need their partners to look at them and give to them what they need. And so, again, I'm not saying the words Venus retrograde, but as we look at these polarities back and forth, a Venus retrograde is going to point to that polarity to give balance, okay, to give feedback, to affect evolution. So, you know, Venus in Leo, because it is fixed fire, Venus in Leo, for the most part, can be monogamous. They can be fixed in their love affairs, where they, you know, where they get into the triangles going on to the next love affair is when there is no equality of giving and receiving. Venus in Leo, an immature, distorted Venus in Leo, my lover won't give to me what I want. They want to have all the giving and they don't want to do, they want to have all the receiving and they don't want to do any giving. So the distortions of Venus in Leo just get, you know, in the fifth house, they just get so caught up in what about me, 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 what my attention, you know, what, give to me, please. And so we think of Leo in the cookbooks as the child. And so what happens to Leo, the child, it does have to grow up. Eventually, Leo realizes the universe doesn't revolve around them. If they're not willing to learn that, the Aquarian polarity, which cookbooks call the lightning bolt, evolutionary astrology will call shock and trauma. Leo gets blown out of its self-centeredness, okay, to see the larger picture. And they can either choose to do that, or it will have it forced upon them. So Venus and Leos have to learn objectivity via the Aquarian polarity. And when a Venus and Leo can learn that, then Venus and Leos in their natural expressions are very loving, giving people. And they're very creative people. They learn how to give as that other person wants to be given to. Aquarian objectivity versus what they think that other person needs.